See that ship burning? 3 years to build, 16,000 oak trees, 400 men on board. It'll sink in 20 minutes, and nobody here is surprised. Welcome to Lisbon. 1520, where ships cost more than cathedrals and last less than bread. Pepper was worth more than gold here, not metaphorically, literally, by weight. Black pepper from Malabar cost more per gram than works silver. A single carrack returning from India carried enough spice to buy a cathedral. 3 successful voyages could fund a war. Lisbon wasn't the capital of Portugal in the 1500s. It was the capital of money. The shipyards ran along the river for half a mile. These weren't boats. They were wooden skyscrapers lying on their sides. A single carrack required 16,000 oak trees. The keel alone weighed more than a house. Watch the workers. They're not hammering randomly. Every plank followed a royal template. Every nail was inventoried. This was Europe's first assembly line, 200 years before Henry Ford was born. The ships were identical because the route was suicide. Half of them sank. Portugal needed replacements fast. You hear that sound? That's an adze hitting wet oak 12 hours a day. Your great-great-grandfather might have swung that tool. If he survived the splinters, the falls, the crushed feet, most didn't. This warehouse stored the entire economy: pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, ginger, but also Chinese porcelain, African ivory, Indian diamonds, Persian carpets. Everything that made Europe's aristocrats feel sophisticated passed through this single building. The clerks here didn't just count spices. They controlled inflation across 3 continents. Too much pepper released at once, the price collapsed. Too little, riots in Antwerp. These men in robes were effectively central bankers, and none of them were elected. Notice the guards. The Casa de India had thicker walls than most fortresses, because on any given Tuesday, there was more portable wealth in this room than in the Vatican treasury. Smelled like heaven, tasted like power. The king lived on the water, not near it, on it. Manuel I built Ribera Palace so close to the Tagus that ships could moor at his front door. Ambassadors from Venice, from the Ottoman Empire, from Congo, they all stepped off boats directly into the throne room. This wasn't vanity, it was strategy. When a fleet returned from India, the king wanted to see it first, before the merchants, before the church, before anyone could skim. He'd stand at that window and count the masts. 3 ships? Decent. 5 ships? Profitable. 7 ships? Build another palace. But here's the thing about building your house on a river. Rivers flood. Earthquakes liquefy riverbanks. And in 1755, the Tagus rose 30 feet in 4 minutes and erased this entire plaza from existence. If you walk here today, you're standing on the ghosts of 23,000 buildings. Customs, the most boring word for the most profitable room in the kingdom. Everything got weighed here, and I mean everything. A merchant couldn't walk from ship to street without a customs official checking his coat pockets. The scales were accurate to half a gram. The ledgers recorded every transaction in duplicate. Why? Because the king took 20%, not of profit, of gross weight. You brought back 1,000 pounds of pepper. 200 pounds belonged to the crown before you sold a single grain. You thought it was your spice? Cute. This was the room where empires were actually built. Not on battlefields, on balance scales. The officials here made more than ship captains. They had nicer houses than knights, and they never left Lisbon. If you wanted to borrow money in 1520, you came here. Genoese bankers on the left, Flemish traders on the right, German metal merchants in the middle. Portuguese, they were the clients, not the creditors. Portugal conquered the sea, but couldn't afford the conquering. Every fleet to India was financed by someone from another country. The interest rates were insane. 30%, 40%. Didn't matter. The return on spices was 300%. A Florentine banker could fund an expedition, lose 2 ships out of 3, and still double his money. Notice something? No Jews. Manuel I expelled them in 1497. Forced conversion or exile. Portugal traded the best financial minds in Europe for religious uniformity. Guess who moved to Amsterdam and built the Dutch East India Company? Consequences take time, but they arrive. Sailors prayed here before departure, not because they were devout, because the voyage to India had a 50% fatality rate. Scurvy, storms, sepsis from a rope burn, dysentery so severe men died from dehydration while surrounded by ocean. You left Lisbon in March. You rounded the Cape of Good Hope in July if the winds cooperated. You reached Goa in September if you didn't starve first. Then you loaded spices and turned around. Entire trip? 18 months minimum. Half the crew never saw this church again. But if you survived, you came back rich enough to retire. A single sailor's share from a successful voyage could buy a house in Lisbon. 2 voyages could buy a farm. 3 voyages meant you never worked again. Russian roulette with better odds. This is where it gets uncomfortable. That column? Slave auction block? By 1520, Lisbon was buying and selling 10,000 African people per year. Not total, per year. They came from Congo, from Angola, from Senegambia. Children, adults, families. The church said it was fine because they'd be baptized. The merchant said it was fine because it was legal. The king said it was fine because he took a cut. Nobody asked the people in chains. Lisbon's wealth didn't come from spices alone. It came from human trafficking on an industrial scale. Sugar plantations in Madeira, gold mines in São Tomé, domestic servants in noble houses. If you lived in Lisbon in 1520 and you were wealthy, you owned people. Period. This isn't a footnote. This was the economy. Hemp rope, tar, canvas, nails. Boring, right? Except a single carrack needed 12 miles of rope. Sails required 2,000 square feet of canvas. The tar alone weighed 6 tons. None of this was made in Portugal. The hemp came from the Baltic. The tar came from Scandinavia. The canvas came from Brittany. Lisbon didn't manufacture the tools of empire. It assembled them. This warehouse was logistics, pure unglamorous logistics. A clerk with an abacus calculating whether they had enough oakum to seal 15 hulls. A foreman checking if the iron shipment from Bilbao arrived on time. Empires don't run on glory, they run on inventory management. This is the last thing sailors saw before the horizon. 3 ships, maybe 4, anchored in the middle of the Tagus, waiting for favorable winds. Supplies already loaded, crew already drunk, priests already blessing. Then the wind turned east, and they left. No radios, no GPS, no weather forecasts. Just an astrolabe, a compass, and the captain's guess about currents. If they sailed too far west around Africa, they'd starve before reaching India. Too far east? They'd wreck on the Mozambique coast. The greatest navigational achievement of the Renaissance was learning how to reliably almost die. Here's who actually lived in Lisbon, not nobles, not merchants. People, African dock workers who'd been enslaved, then freed, then couldn't leave because they had nowhere to go. Moorish converts who weren't trusted by Christians or Muslims, Chinese sailors who jumped ship, Indian servants, Brazilian indigenous people brought back as curiosities. Lisbon in 1520 was the most diverse city in Europe, not by choice, by empire, and they all got shoved into this neighborhood, too valuable to expel, too foreign to integrate. The Inquisition watched them, the church harassed them, the government taxed them double. If you were born here, you were Lisbon's engine, but never Lisbon's citizen. The Dominicans ran the Inquisition. This cloister looks peaceful. It was an interrogation headquarters, those monks walking in silence. Some of them signed execution orders before breakfast. The Inquisition in Portugal wasn't about religion. It was about economics. Converted Jews, new Christians, controlled most of Lisbon's merchant networks. The church accused them of practicing Judaism in secret. Convenient, since a conviction meant the crown seized their property. Happened thousands of times. Faith was the excuse. Theft was the business model. Lisbon ruled the world for exactly 37 years. Then Spain invaded. Then the Dutch stole the trade routes. Then the earthquake erased the waterfront. By 1800, Lisbon was a faded postcard of something that used to matter. But for one generation? For 37 years? If you wanted to be rich, be powerful, or just watch the future happen in real time, you came here. Which city should we visit next? Cairo during the Mamluk Sultanate? Amsterdam in the Golden Age? Drop a comment. Let's keep moving through time.